Happy Wednesday to you. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the apple, and I showed you the apple and how it was all full of worms and the worms had destroyed the apple. Well, we're going to go back. We're going to talk a little bit about water and how water is so important. Do you remember when God created the world and He created water? We are still using that same water today. The water is never lost. It's always being reused, recycled over and over again. So we're actually still drinking the same water that Adam and Eve drank. It has been purified many times, but it's the same water. God doesn't have to recreate water. He created it one time, and we've been using it ever since. And we'll be talking and learning how that could even be possible. But isn't that kind of interesting that when you drink a cup of water, it could be in the same cup of water that Adam drank? That's pretty cool to think about. When the Indians came to this area, they didn't build their houses or their teepees or set up their teepees just anywhere. They set their teepees right beside the Spokane River because everybody needs water. Everyone needs fresh water. You can't just drink any water. You have to have water that's purified to a certain level or you'll get sick. So that's why you can't drink ocean water. Your body's not meant to handle all of that salt. So they built their teepees or set up their teepees right beside the Spokane River. And that's where they lived for centuries. I don't know how long they lived here before the white man finally came and scooted them off. But they lived there for years, and they were happy as can be right by the Spokane River. We all need water. And whether you're a plant, whether you're an animal, whether you're a human being, everyone needs water. So water is an important thing. Well, Mr. D.C. Corbin is his name, and that man was he was a very smart man in many ways. He had learned how to build railroads where in his back east home. I think he lived in Boston or someplace like that. Anyway, a long ways from here. And he moved out about the time that silver was discovered in the mines in Idaho. And as you know, in order to get to the silver, they had to dig deep in the earth, and then the silver would be in the rock formations. And there's still silver and still mines in Idaho. But they had to have a way to move the silver to some place because there were no cities. Usually when there's a mining area, there's not just a city right there because it's kind of a rugged area, mountainous area. So they had to find a way to get the silver to a city so that they could sell it, so they could use it. And so Mr. Corbin came up with this idea of building just a little railroad, not a very long railroad, not a railroad that went miles and miles and miles, but just a short railroad from Idaho to Spokane, and the silver came through Spokane. So they would load it onto these cars, these box car kind of things. They really weren't box cars, but they were cars, like train cars, not like driving cars. And they would fill up these cars full of silver, and then they would purify it here in Spokane. And Spokane became, people had to come here to work, and so there were more people that came because of the silver, and Spokane became quite a wealthy little city at one point in time. And so it had to do with Mr. Corbin that, because he could have built the railroad from here to Minneapolis, that's in the other direction, and all the silver would have gone there. But no, it came to Spokane. So it put Spokane on the map, so to speak. So Spokane became a little silver town, and had much wealth. Many people were wealthy because of the silver mines in Idaho. Well, this Mr. Corbin, in his life, not only did he know about trains, but he knew about agriculture. And yesterday we talked a little bit about how all of this area in Spokane Valley was excellent soil, but it wasn't worth anything because it didn't have any water. There was no way to get water to it. And yes, maybe a little water on your garden, you could, pour some water on it. But for acreage, there was just no way, there was no water. And so Mr. Corbin had realized that our lakes, particularly Newman Lake, Hauser Lake, Spirit Lake, Coeur d'Alene Lake, those lakes set higher than the valley. And so he came up with this idea of a gravity fed. Now, you know, gravity is what pulls things to the earth. So if I take my pencil and let it go, guess what? It goes to the ground. It doesn't just float because gravity is holding us on the ground. So when you have water here in the lake and the ground is here, the water can be forced down. The water will naturally flow down into the valley. So he came up with this idea of building ditches. And some of the ditches were very big and made out of just dirt. Some ditches were smaller and made out of cement. And he made this whole valley was filled with ditches. And they would open the gates and lower the gates and sometimes there would be a lot of water and some there would be a small amount of water. And you regulated your water on your property. Like the property where I live right now was full of apples at one time, apple orchards at one time. And they opened and closed gates, and sometimes they needed a lot of water. If it had been a really dry season and they needed much water, they could open the gates, and the water would trickle down into the apple orchard. Or sometimes it would have been really a rainy season, they would block those gates, and then there wouldn't be any water because the trees already had enough water. So it was quite the systems. And then sometimes, of course, Mr. Corbin had to figure it out. If you're going from here to here, but what happens if this has a bump in it? Water can't go up. You know, water doesn't ever go up. So he had to figure out, how am I going to get this land, this water to flow? And sometimes he would have to build a thing called a flume. And it would be a ditch of made out of wood that stood up on legs. And so you would have a ditch, like a trench above water, above land, and the water would flow down there in order to get over some of these problems with the water having to go up. He would have to build a flume, or if the water, if the land went down too deep, well, then all the water would fall down here. And yet he needed to have, this man here, he was quite the man. He could figure out this watering, this irrigation system. And, for the most part, it worked pretty well. There were always, some glitches here and there. But there were many people that were hired by Mr. Corbin and his company, of course. And they, for years, we swam in the ditches. We thought it was great. We never thought that it would ever be any different. You just get used to what you get used to. And as little girls, we spent our summer times playing in the ditches. And the water was as warm as Coeur d'Alene Lake was. And it was lovely. It was fun, and it was right here on your property. So it was lots of, kid stories. Anyway, but he had this gravity-fed watering system. And it worked for years and years. Now, today, we don't use that irrigation system anymore because we don't have to. They learned, and I don't know exactly when they learned this, but they learned that underneath Spokane, underneath the valley, there is a river that runs, not the Spokane River, but there is a river that runs underneath this area, the whole valley. And I think it starts at around the Spirit Lake area, and it flows through all of Spokane, this underwater river called the aquifer. And those are your two spelling words, aquifer and gravity. Maybe those are your bonus spelling words or your challenge spelling words. So this river is called an aquifer. Now, the cool thing about the aquifer is that the water is so pure because it's constantly running through dirt, it's constantly running through gravel and rocks, and believe it or not, that is taking all the grunky, junky stuff out of the water and making it pure for us to drink. So all of the water you drink here in Spokane area on the valley floor comes from the aquifer. And what a lovely blessing that is, because it's not just, they don't have to put a bunch of chemicals in it, because it's pure water and it's tested all the time. And the tests come back and says this water is really excellent water to drink. It's not like water in some places where they don't have that nice river. But Spokane is blessed with a gigantic river underneath us. Is that too cool or what? We have a pump behind our house, one of those pumps with a handle, and you can pump for a while, and pretty soon out comes this water. And of course, it's always nice and cold because it comes from deep inside the earth. And what a wonderful blessing that is. And haven't we had quite the talk about water? I mean, look at the children of Israel. They were, in Mara, they were so upset because they were thirsty and they didn't have good water to drink. And then God made it sweet by asking or telling Moses to put in the tree, and the water became sweet. And yesterday we talked about in Rephidim where the water flowed out of the rock because people were so thirsty, and God blessed them by having a river of water out of a rock. And that is just too interesting to think about. But we have had quite the conversation about water. Water is important. And you read in your science book this week, I don't have my science book here. Yes, I do. Just a second. You read in your science book here about water. And it was, remember that page right there? Okay. It was page 94. And it says, water is one of our natural resources. We drink it, we play in it, we use it to water plants that provide food for us. Water is one of the basic needs of living things. And what that means is that everything has to have water, okay? Water is everywhere. And in the summertime, well, I'm kind of spoiled. In the summertime, I just want to be at a lake, or I just want to be where there's water. When we were little girls, we used to run, of course, we watered with the ditch water, and we would run through the water, and it was so much fun. Oh, yeah. So maybe you do. Maybe you still run through the water. Today's water is the water that you water your lawns with, or the water that you drink. That water is cold because it comes from deep within the ground. But the water that we had as little girls and played in was warmer water because it came out of the lake, of Coeur d'Alene Lake. And so when we ran through the sprinklers, the water was not like running through the sprinklers today. Today, when you run through the sprinklers, you got to be, oh man, you got to be ready for it because that water's really cold. But the water of yesteryear here in Spokane Valley was warmer water, and it was a little more fun to play in. But water is one of our basic needs. Most of the earth is covered by water. With so much water, you think there'd be plenty for everything, but lots of it is salt water. So that's going to be our next science experiment. I'm going to show you some salt water and how we're going to purify it. Anyway, God sends rain and snow to the earth, and that gives us fresh water, because as you know, rain isn't salty and neither is snow. But it says we should take care of the water we have. We need to keep it clean so it can be used for drinking and bathing. And like I said, our water is the same water that Adam and Eve had. The water has not been recreated. It's just been recycled, okay? The next page says we should also conserve water. There are many ways you and your family can help. Turn off the water when you're not using it. Wash clothes or dishes when you only have a full load. And I'm sure Mommy does those things. It's interesting here, though, in Spokane area, we have an abundance of water because we have that river underneath us, and the river is there, and the river is just, it is flowing, and every day you might as well use it because it's only going to the ocean. Okay, that's where it's flowing to. It's eventually going to get to the ocean. And so, we can, the conserving of water in Spokane is not as big as it is in some areas. In some areas, they do have a problem. Where Mr. Harper's parents live in Georgia, lots of times they don't have any water, and they're just so be careful to use, not to wash their cars too much or not to use too much water wasted, and so they have to really conserve water. But here in Spokane, our water conservation is not as essential as it is in some places of the earth, of the world. You know, some people have no water. People in India have no water. Many times they have asked for, will you give some money so that we can dig a well? And they show a line of people with a little bucket and gathering or collecting or getting water out of some kind of a little polluted pond. And they have stood in hours just to get a dip of water. And you'll see them carrying these two little pails back to their houses. Oh, we are so incredibly blessed here in the Northwest to have wonderful water. What a great natural resource. When it says natural resource, it means that's something that God has made, not something that man has come up with, but something that God has provided for the human, for society. So we have natural, from nature, okay, natural resources. So the next time we're together, I want to do a little science experiment and show you a little bit about how they clean water and how we can still be using Adam's water. Isn't that a pretty interesting thing? And of course, yesterday we learned that all of this, the valley floor, was because it was so, the soil was so good once it had water, that they grew orchards and orchards and orchards. And the orchards were here for, I don't know, probably 50, 60 years. And then, of course, one winter, one early spring, the apple trees died not because there wasn't water, but because it was too cold. And all of the orchards were lost here in the valley. And so people just didn't build back. And instead now we build houses on it. And I don't know if that's better, but we've built houses on it instead. So in Spokane, we are truly blessed with a great watering system, starting with the aquifer underneath us, and then being influenced in the area of agriculture just by the wisdom or the brains of Mr. D.C. Corbin, who thought of that gravity-fed watering system, which kind of got us started into thinking about Spokane could be a really great area for living, or a great area for producing things, that agriculture kind of things, because we have good soil combined with good water now. So, all right, good. We'll talk about it later. Bye-bye.